My presentation is not talking about capabilities. It's just really trying to paint the story or the situation that we have and a possible approach to be able to solve that. I think one of the things that I really want to enforce, is that I think when we talk about Amazon's security lake and what it's really presenting is another option. It's basically challenging the way we are doing our business to see how can we optimize, how can we look at our vulnerabilities and closing that security gap. So just real quick, again, we said we were going to run through a story, and I like this because it just starts to make it a little bit more real. So the situation here is we're talking about a shop. It's a multinational retailer. We're looking at probably a mid-sized to a large-sized company that is basically enlisting a lot of security tools, multiple different types of delivery models that we've seen in the past. And so it's how do we tackle that and really helping two key personas. We're only going to talk about one today, which is our CISO or the security leader. We've seen it many times. Either it's a CISO or it's a VP of security that's really leading the charge on vulnerability management and risk. And so we start to drill down. No, I'm moving quick, but we start to say, hey, what is this business? What is it starting to comprise of? It's in several different geolocations and operating, and it's a multinational retailer. Why is this important? So we're starting to establish they've probably got a heavy amount of complexity with technologies that they've got. They may not have integrations that are being interrelated with those security tools. So we've got those challenges, and in that journey, starting to say, am I really confident with my solution? Am I really receiving the optimized solution in all of those tools? And what does my next 3 to 5 year plan look like? And is it really the track that I want to go down? I think this is important to start to call out. So the items at the bottom, you start to see, what are we trying to depict? We're trying to depict where is the decision maker situated? How do they communicate with our security analyst? Again, we talked about two key personas that are really starting to achieve a benefit from this strategy. So what does the CISO need to know in order to make their changes and mitigate risk? And what does the security analyst need on a day-to-day basis for them to work on the most important items? So on the right-hand side, you'll start to see, okay, how does this drill down? The functions is what we're familiar with. I know we talk about XDR, we talk about MDR, we talk about all the other acronyms, but there are core fundamental technologies that we use in the stack. So we're all in this hall. We all have these same types of how are we getting alerting, how are we getting vulnerability management, how are we getting EDR into our stack, and how are we managing that? What this is painting the picture of is the domain is you may have a SOC doing two of those items, then you may have another vulnerability management team that's doing something different. And how is that being managed? Is it being managed inside the company? Is it being managed by a third party or an MSSP? Once again, what we're challenging here today within the next 15, 20 minutes is how are we doing that business? How are we centralizing the telemetry that we get for proactive and reactive measures? All right, so we start to pull, there's many use cases and many challenges that we've identified over the last year and a half with AWS and partnering together with the Amazon Security Lake. So while there's many, we'll go into this a little bit later with OCSF, but we just pulled the thread on what we feel are the most pressing, executive level, security analyst level, and more specifically, the challenge of risk management. What are those challenges? Lacking the information to effectively assess the risk. So again, EDR, SIM, vulnerability management, TIP, the consolidation of tools and vendors, they're all doing the same exact thing. What's my risk? What's my risk to the organization, and how can I make a difference from that? So we're suggesting the challenge is consolidating the output into one centralized location and making decisions and getting that to the teams that can make a difference. Identifying, prioritizing those risk areas. If we can get it in one centralized location with one format that has many telemetry data points, then we can start to look at anomalies. We can start to look at things that we can go address proactively and make a change. The second one is data quality, basing the decisions on the disparate data. Again, it's coming from several different areas. Lack of external contextual information, how are we correlating that and prioritizing and moving that up in the value chain, and challenging to identify those gaps. So again, it's two challenges that we're discussing today. So from left to right, I love this type of a chart because it says, William, what are you really trying to say after 5 minutes of strategy and the risk? So if you move from left to right, we've already talked about a lot of the domains or technologies. Again, don't get too latched on, well, SIM's going away or SOAR is dead. Don't focus on that, okay? There's a lot of discussion on the floor about all of this. But what we're trying to say is there are some sources of technology that give us the analytics to make decisions. That's on the left-hand side. So at Kyndryl and AWS, we've categorized that on the left, and we're suggesting, obviously, taking that into the security lake in the OCSF Common Data Framework, which gives us not only security data, but it also gives us asset data, it gives us compliance data, it gives us many other data points, but for right now, we're super focused, hyper-focused on the OCSF data coming in. Pulling that from the Amazon Security Lake, and then bringing that into the Kyndryl's enterprise, we start to identify Kyndryl Bridge. That is our main interface, our main platform for visualization, marketplace, decision-making, and driving KPIs. So that is our main source of what can we provide a CISO in order to make their risk management decisions for analysts to make a difference. So we take that secure environment, the comprehensive data retention and governance policies, we start to establish the algorithms, again, utilizing AWS. With that partnership, run data models against that based on use cases, and start to take those areas and separate them into two parts. Take the findings and send that to the analyst. So they can do two methods. We can port that back into the technologies that they have in their stack, but also look at the anomalies that are in that stack so we can make proactive changes. And then the security leaders, regardless of what that cadence looks like, it could be weekly, monthly, has a discussion with their security analyst. But before we provide those two, we provide threat intelligence and known exploits. So this is where also the power of contextual information, the power of what our understanding is of the landscape, we correlate that against the data that we have received from their sources on the left-hand side and start to provide that consult-led approach on how you can make changes in your security posture. Okay, so coming from left to right, again, that solution starts to say, all right, how, William, when you've got that solution, how are you really starting to change their security posture? So down there below, achieving that unified view of security. Once again, and the increased value comes from multiple sources. So the solution that we talked about, it can be just a SIM. There's extreme value from contextual information that we provide. But as you start to add more telemetry, whether it's an EDR or a tip that either they have or what we provide, you start to increase the value and reducing risk. So you come from stronger recommendations and clarity over the priority of those risk areas. Data quality, improving the data and removing those gaps. So now we are able to enrich that data over time. So again, with more and more data modeling that we inject, more lessons learned that we learn from the business and other vector leaders, we're able to increase value in order to provide changes that they must make. Increasing confidence in the recommended action. Again, that's where it just starts to help that story, more data in, we're able to make proactive changes and those reactive changes. I think one of the things just this past week, had a great conversation with a potential opportunity. And the conversation started, and this is really kind of how I want you to walk away from today, is that with what we're positioning with Security Lake, it's not replacing a SIEM. Okay, that's not what we're stating or positioning. We're not trying to replace an EDR solution. But what we are suggesting is there's always optimization, and how are we best using those tools that we have in our inventory. Again, there's always a rush to implement a tool without really tying what are we trying to achieve and how much money are we spending based on that model. It happens all the time. So we are suggesting, and the conversation that we had, which I think started to touch home, was this absolutely could be another approach for you to look at how are you using your tools, and is there a more efficient way to get data into one location to give you risk and have the security analyst to be able to make those changes. So real use cases. All right, so next step. I said it was going to be fast, kind of running through a story. Again, the relationship's been going on with AWS for the past year and a half. It is literally a journey that we're ongoing right now with those two key personas, with a CISO and security analyst. In the future, we absolutely want to get into the direction of how can they audit and compliance risk manager find additional value? How can an IT ops or IT department find value in the solution? Because the OCSF framework and the data elements extends way beyond security. So we're getting all the analytics, and it can help multiple use cases. Next steps. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it just really starts to challenge how do you do your business? That is really the starting point. What is your current situation, and how can we complement that? Kyndryl also provides a threat insights advisory service as well, so we're happy to be able to sit down and have this conversation like I'm having with you today. What do you want to do? How can this fit within your arsenal? How can this help in the value of Security Lake and our contextual information? That's all I have. Thank you very much.